Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It's August 7th. It's time for another batch of Deep Space updates. And as usual, we start with the launches from the past couple of weeks. And we have to go all the way back to 18th of July because summer's busy. I have a lot of vacations. But yeah, 18th of July, Rocket Lab launched another Electron. Baby, come back, and come back indeed it did. We have an awesome 14-minute video showing an onboard camera from stage separation all the way to touchdown in the ocean. So this launch, the payload on it was primarily four CubeSats for NASA called Starling, not Starlink. That'll really confuse the spell correcting. That is a series of four satellites that are supposed to demonstrate coordinated operations, formation, flying, communications between them. There's two Lemur 2 satellites for Spire Global, and there's also a fairly large LEO-3, as it's called, demonstration satellite for Telesat. So, very good. They recovered the bushing. As Peter Beck said, they went fishing and they found themselves a booster. Moving on to the 20th of July, Kuaizhou 1A, launching from Jiuquan, carrying a satellite called Tianmu, which, it's a meteorology satellite by the looks of things in a 500-kilometer sun-sync orbit. This launch was sponsored by Chinese car maker Dongfeng, who put up a bunch of cars next to it and released a bunch of PR images, I guess, 20th of July, there was a Falcon 9 from Vandenberg, which looked pretty good because I could actually see it. It launched close enough to sunset that it was actually visible. The upper stage was visible against the night sky, and we had a few UFO reports from the west coast. 22nd of July in China, the Series 1 from Jiuquan, carrying a pair of satellites called Changkun and Jingshadai. Forget the pronunciation. Yeah, another 500-kilometer sun-synchronous orbit. This mission was actually called Lemon Tree. So Changkun is, they're launched into a 500-kilometer orbit. As I understand it, this company that built this satellite, they want to demonstrate very low orbit satellites, down about 300 kilometers, closer to the targets, using ion thrusters to keep them going against the drag of the atmosphere. The other satellite, it was described as being a hyperspectral remote sensing satellite developed by ADA Space, but the blurb also mentions things like blockchain technology, which is probably something they said to get investors on board. They have published images from the satellite showing like Salt Lake City, but they also published images showing a screen on the side of the satellite showing ads in space to a camera so they can show this on the ground. Yeah. But also, space fans in China, they went looking for the booster and they found it out in the desert. So that's kind of cool. I haven't seen one of these recovered. So 23rd of July, there was another Chinese launch in the form of a Long March 2D from Taiyuan. 3 satellites into sun-synchronous orbit. These are SkySight satellites that are built by like a Chinese university. The idea, I think, is there's 3 different Earth observation satellites. Number 1 is about SAR, synthetic aperture radar. Number 2 is optical, and the third one is infrared. There's also a 4th payload on board from Galaxy Space, which is a flat panel communication satellite. Think Chinese version of the Starlink satellite design, nice flat satellites that unfold. 24th of July, there was another Falcon 9 carrying Starlink Group 6-6 from Florida. This was carrying 22 V2 Starlink satellites, building out the the 6th generation constellation, the 6th shell, I guess. 26th of July, there was another Long March 2D carrying 3 Yaogan 36 reconnaissance satellites for Chinese Department of, Chinese military, armed forces. And 28th of July, Falcon 9, another batch of Starlink 22 V2 satellites from Florida. But yeah, the interesting one was the 29th of July. There was a Falcon Heavy carrying Jupiter 3, also known as EchoStar 24. This holds the record for the biggest satellite launched into geostationary Earth orbit. Actually, the heaviest satellite, because we don't know how big it unfolds into, but it is a 9.2-ton satellite, dry apparently. It has little engines on it, little plasma thrusters to allow it to remain in orbit. But This was a dual RTLS recovery with both boosters coming back and providing a spectacular sight with a double, triple, quadruple, lots of sonic booms, all the sonic booms you could want. The second stage performed 3 burns. Now, it didn't quite put the satellite into geostationary orbit. What it did was it performed the boost up, and then about 3 hours later, partway through the geostationary transfer orbit, the engine lit up and it took out a lot of the inclination so that when the satellite got up to geostationary orbit, it didn't need to provide as much thrust. And I'm not sure, but I think the idea is that that left the second stage still with a perigee close to the Earth, so it would come back and burn up. But yeah, biggest satellite launched into geostationary orbit. Good job, SpaceX. India on the 30th of July, the PSLV. 2nd of August, we had Antares launch, and this is the final launch of Antares in its current configuration because, of course, this is a rocket it's an American rocket, a Ukrainian first stage, and Russian engines, and that means that first stage with those engines is never flying again. So the replacement is, of course, supposed to be built by Firefly, and they are currently working with Northrop Grumman on that. It will be a couple of years, but this time they launched a Cygnus cargo spacecraft to the space station. This one was called Laurel Clark, named for one of the astronauts on Columbia during STS-107. They broke up. She was the one that had a Runrig CD in her collection. If you're Scottish, you know who Runrig are, right? They're a Scottish rock band. And apparently that CD got recovered and brought back to the people in the band. So that's already docked at the space station with a bunch of hardware. Also, the second stage of the rocket carried a trio of CubeSats which are being deployed independently. There's like a Sea Lion for the US Coast Guard Academy and a UT ProSat for Virginia Tech. They're all part of this mission. They'll be operating up there. 3rd of August, another Chinese launch, Long March 4C from Fengyun. That's, again, a sun-synchronous orbit, 500-kilometer altitude meteorology satellite, Fengyun 3F. That's part of their series of satellites that do that. So on the 3rd of August, we had a Falcon 9 carrying Galaxy 37, also known as Galaxy 13R because it's a replacement for Galaxy 13. That's a satellite which launched, in the early 2000s. It launched on sea launch to geostationary orbit. It's been doing, obviously, communication service up there, but it uses portions of the electromagnetic spectrum that ground providers want freed up for 5G. So that's a big reason for launching this replacement. It was originally going to fly on an Ariane 6, but since that's delayed and they have a time limit on getting the spectrum freed up, that's why they've shifted it over to a Falcon 9. Finally, on August 7th, just a few hours ago, we had a Falcon 9 carrying another batch of 22 Starlink V2 minis from Florida. And now we go over to the regular space news, except this is going to take an irregular diversion into the land of room temperature superconductors, which you've probably heard the stories, the rumors, etc. We'll go back a few days. There was this paper which appeared on Archive, which is a preprint server by Korean teams, supposedly claiming to have discovered superconductivity in a sample of material called LK99 that they had made in ovens and by grinding up material with lanarkite and copper phosphate and things like that in there. I don't know the exact recipe. But the interesting thing about this is that, yes, this is pretty bold claims to say that you've discovered like a room temperature superconductor, like Nobel Prize worthy. But the fact that the material preparation was something that people could do with minimal amount of equipment meant a lot of people have been mucking around with this, including a guy, Andrew McCulloch, who works at Varda Space. There's a space link. See, Varda Space, they are all about doing in-space manufacturing. They have a spacecraft in orbit right now that is supposedly manufacturing a drug which is easier to make in zero G, and they want to recover it and sell it on the market. That's their demonstration. But obviously, they have a lot of material scientists on their staff to try to identify such products. And so, yeah, they started trying to make it, and they put up a Twitch stream, and there was people literally just watching hours and hours of this oven just baking this sample. So the question is still definitely out there as to whether this is an actual superconductor or just something that is strongly diamagnetic. The demos that we've seen are primarily things floating over magnets. And first of all, yes, you can fake this by special effects. I don't think it would be very hard for me to actually fake this if I tried. But even if it was a real rock levitating, you still have to contend with the fact that you can make things like graphite levitate. It's not superconductive, but it is strongly diamagnetic. And really what we're looking for is not just magnetic levitation, you're actually looking for like flux locking, where the sample will actually hold position, because modern superconductors, rather than the traditional elemental metal types where you've got the new kind, they allow the magnetic field to penetrate it and it sort of holds the thing in place. So look, I'm fascinated by this. I don't know enough to talk about it because I'm not really a solid state physicist. Having said that, I know a lot more than a lot of the videos out there. But, be skeptical. Don't think this is going to revolutionize the world overnight, but be very excited still, nevertheless. Moving onwards, in more mundane terms, Aerojet Rocketdyne is now officially part of L3Harris. The deal has been closed. The website already moved over when I was making my AJ10 video. I was making it very hard to find stuff. Apparently, their headquarters is going to be moving out of Sacramento to, Florida. In deep space, Voyager 2 lost contact with Earth after a command sequence unfortunately made it 0.2 degrees off center, and that attenuated the reception enough that it was unable to receive Earth. However, the Deep Space Network was able to detect the carrier wave at the start of August, and a couple of days ago, they performed a shout into deep space. They got their best antenna. I believe it was the Australian one was the best aligned. They, ramped up the power on the most powerful transmitter. They probably pushed it right to the limit, maybe into the red line. I don't know what their exact thing was, but they shouted a signal out into the void, and 37 hours later, the signal came back from Voyager as it realigned with Earth. In Boca Chica, Texas, boy, it has been a wild few weeks. First of all, serial number 15, the first big successful flight of a Starship. That booster is being scrapped. Oh dear, what a tragedy. We had a full test of the booster Bidet. It looks very impressive. And then we went on to actual booster testing, starting out with a spin prime test. And yesterday we had a full 33 engine burn. However, it actually only fired 29 engines because 4 of the engines either shut down during ignition or were taken out of the loop prior to ignition due to problems. So this is not 100% successful, but the most successful thing was the booster Bidet versus the booster rockets did not result in massive rapid unscheduled digging this time. There was a lot of steam. It looked very, very impressive. The burn time was apparently only like 2.78 seconds, I think. They were aiming for 5 seconds, so that might be a pointer to something else going on. Also, simultaneously, they have been testing various ring designs for hot staging. That's where they're going to light up the engines on the second stage before the first stage separates. And they need to obviously have some vents there to allow that to escape. They've been putting these on stress test stands with instruments to measure the distortion of it. Presumably, they are going to take the Booster 9 and move it back to the high bay or one of the high bays so that they can work on it a bit more, correct any problems with the engine, integrate this hot staging vent ring, and probably add a bit more shielding, because I think they might need a bit more shielding on the top of the booster. It's really not clear, but they're obviously going to have to test this. The other SpaceX thing, I guess, that's going on is that, well, it's sort of tangential. Polaris Dawn, there's been some talk recently from Jared. They've confirmed that they are going to be flying now in 2024, so that's pushed the thing out a whole lot. If you remember, there was a chance originally it was going to be Christmas of 2022, and I didn't think that was happening. 2023, I was thinking was pretty good, but 2024, that's where it is now. Yeah, they've just talked about how the team has been going in and working on avionics briefings and all that other stuff. But more interestingly, the team was out at Oshkosh. That's the biggest gathering of the experimental aircraft people. We had, of course, Jared in his MiG-29, some Alpha Jets, some L-39 Albatrosses, all that stuff. flying information, wowing the crowds, and getting some cool photos from from John Krause, who got to sit in the back of like a bomber in the gunner site shooting film or shooting photographs of this. It looked pretty amazing. I would love to have actually got there. Draco. Yes, NASA and Lockheed and DARPA and Lockheed Martin have basically all signed on to develop Draco, right? That's the nuclear propulsion demonstration in space. So the reactor is actually going to be built by BWXT Advanced Technologies. Lockheed Martin is going to build everything else. The demo is slated for no later than 2027, but I won't be surprised if it ends up later. The current mission profile looks like an operational orbit above 700 kilometers, probably below 2,000. They will perform engine fire demonstrations, but it won't do any major maneuvers. So I'm presuming that they will like be firing at 90 degrees to the orbit, basically making plane changes if they do that. The engine that they have designed for this initial demo is only going to get about 700 seconds of specific impulse, which is low for a nuclear engine. The kind of engines we saw demonstrated in the 60s had got the specific impulse up to 800, and more modern designs were even higher than that. But yeah, they're just really hoping to demonstrate the end-to-end functionality of a nuclear engine in space. The mission will only last a couple of months because they're primarily going to be constrained by the fact that they have to use liquid hydrogen as their propellant, and that will get boil off over time. Another DoD-related thing is that Space Command was going to be moved to Huntsville, Alabama. Trump made that decision, and now Biden has reversed that decision, and US Space Command is going to stay where it currently is, in Colorado. I'm presuming this is a way of saving money because you don't spend any money moving it. There's some on Mars. There's some new close-ups of Ingenuity on the ground. It's looking great. Percy has caught up with Ingenuity, which had sailed on ahead after its winter rest. And yeah, we get some nice, great close-up images. Well, close-ish. The camera on Perseverance is actually quite good at zooming in and making things closer than they appear. Also, Lego in the US released their Lego model of the Perseverance, and I was building that on live stream in the last couple of days. We now have an August 25th planned launch date for Crew 7. That's going to be Yasmin Mosbelli, Andreas Morgensen, Satoshi Furukawa, and Konstantin Borisov on another long duration mission to the space station. And the selection for Crew 8 has gone up. That is going to be in February 24th. It's going to have Commander Matthew Dominic, pilot Michael Barrett, mission specialist Jeanette Epps, and Roscosmos astronaut Alexander Grebenkin, and they will join Expeditions 70 and 71. So this is, so first of all, Jeanette Epps, you might have heard her before. She was originally going to fly on a Soyuz and then got mysteriously removed from it. And then was going to fly on Starliner, and obviously that still isn't going anywhere. Well, she's finally going to get to fly after all this time. This is also, I think, the least experienced in terms of flight hours of any crew I think I've seen in a long time. So the only person I think on this list that has any spaceflight experience is Michael Barrett. He's flown 2 space shuttle missions, but he was only like short duration missions to deliver hardware. He didn't stay on the station for 6 months. So, it's just, we're moving. We've got a whole bunch of astronauts that need to fly. You've got to give them a chance. Axiom 4 has been confirmed, so there is going to be another Axiom mission after Axiom 3. I'm sure there's a lot of countries already planning to add their astronauts to the list and get that, prestige from flying astronauts to the space station. Astra, the Alameda-based rocket builder, this week they laid off 25% of their workforce. They have reassigned a bunch of their rocket building people to work on their space engine. That's their little ion thruster, which I think was Apollo Fusion. Was a company they bought with their SPAC money. And it's now the most profitable part of the company and possibly the only profitable part of the company. And that does lead to questions as to whether Rocket 4 will actually fly, whether it's getting enough attention to actually do what it's supposed to. Meanwhile, an unflown Astra Rocket 3 is now on display at Chabot Space and Science Centre in Oakland. I want to go and visit it. And frankly, I don't know how they got it through the front door and got it set up. I'd love to see some pictures about that. Finally, India's Chandrayaan-3 is now in lunar orbit. It's already sending back images, and of course it's expected to land later this month, and I will be looking forward to it and crossing my fingers and hope that it's successful, because I want to see the excitement of the launch replicated on the landing. And that's the news. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.